Hi, my name is Jack Beers, and I am delighted to sit down and chat with Matthew Kelly about his latest book, Life is Messy. Matthew, it's good to be with you.
Thank you, Jack. Good to be with you.
So, I wanted to start here, Matthew. I wanted to start with this is somewhere around your 30th book. How do you decide what to write and when the right time is to publish a book?
That's a great question. I have this huge architectural chest, about 150 years old, in my office, my study at home where I write, and it was made to hold architectural drawings. So it has these huge drawers, and I had them divided into three, and in each compartment there is a different book idea. When I get an idea for a book, I usually take 30 minutes. I sit down, I write down everything I can write that comes to mind about the idea for the book. And then I create a file folder, and I put those notes in there. And then as I travel, I'll think of something and I'll jot something down. And when I come back, I'll put that note in that folder. I have about maybe almost 400 book ideas in this chest. And so when it's time to write a book, I take a look at what's in there. I take a look at what's happening in my own life, what's happening in the world, and I choose something to work on. That being said, I am usually working on 4 or 5 books at the same time. You do get stuck on certain projects, and rather than sitting around waiting to get unstuck, I find the best way to get unstuck is to work on another project, and that somehow that stimulates me to then go back and work on whatever the main project is at the time. In this particular book, I had not planned to write this book this year. I think it is largely in response to what has happened in the world in the last 18 months and how that's affected us. I think it has shown the cracks in our lives. I think it's shown the cracks in our society, and we're all trying to make sense of that, in our own ways. And I felt that this contribution could help people make sense of the mess. Life is messy.
I think that segues nicely into something that I've heard you say to me often, which is every book you write has a promise and some sort of benefit to the reader. So seeing the context of the world and what everybody's going through, then what is the promise of Life is Messy and the benefit it brings to the reader?
I think the promise of Life is Messy is that you can make peace with the mess. We're not going to fix all the mess. We're not going to clean all the mess up. I think we labor under that illusion or delusion. Life is messy. It will always be messy. And that doesn't mean we can't fix certain messes. That doesn't mean we can't make some people's lives a little bit easier. And it doesn't mean we can't lighten certain people's burdens. But once we're finished loving someone, making someone happier, lightening someone's burden, making someone's day a little bit easier, life will still be messy, and we have to make peace with that. In the opening of the book, I think there's a couple of passages that sort of relate to this. I open the book by saying, life is messy. This is the human dilemma. You're not doing it wrong. I think sometimes when people's lives are a mess, they think, I'm doing it wrong. And that just simply isn't the case. Do we do things wrong? Yeah, we do. And do those things add to the mess? Yeah, they absolutely do. But I don't think we can live in the illusion that if we were doing everything right, life wouldn't be messy. Life would still be messy. Life isn't a color within the lines exercise. It's a wild and outrageous invitation full of uncertain outcomes. Sometimes it is beautifully rational. At other times, it lacks all logic. And what appears to be a step back today may turn out to be the first marvelous step forward 10 years from now. And so we have this hunger for certainty, really an obsession with certainty, an addiction to certainty. And the reality is a step back today could be the first step in a new journey, and we don't even realize that for 10 years. And I think that's important. I think the other piece of the promise is to liberate people from shame and self-loathing. I think these are among the most common emotions in our society, and they're really destructive, to us and then to our relationships. Toward the end of the opening part of the book, I say, everyone has their own mess to contend with. Our tendency is to think that we are the only ones with a mess, that our mess is messier, more embarrassing, more shameful than other people's mess. It just isn't so. You don't have to have it all together. Nobody does. And so I think learning to make peace with the mess is essential to living a fulfilling life and to be able to relate with people, in powerful ways. Because when we're caught up in shame and self-loathing in our own mess, it really creates a very self-referential context for our lives. And we lose awareness of who's in front of us and what they're dealing with and what their mess is. I think that is the promise of the book, is those two pieces.
Is part of the book about calling to mind awareness of the fact that life is messy? Because I think about my own life. I read the book and I started thinking about my own life and times where my life got really messy. It was almost always the moment in time where I was least aware of how messy things were when I was just in it. So is part of the book trying to build awareness around the fact that just life is messy and we're never going to get away from it?
I think part of the book is coming to the realization and being able to own the fact that my life is messy. And I think that certainly comes through in the book very, very clearly. I wanted people to know how, at different times in my life has been very messy. And that there are messes that I deal with every day. And so I think that for the reader to come to the conclusion, my life is messy, and that's okay. I think that's the awareness that I think you're referring to there.
Yeah. Before we get into your mess a little bit, I wanted to see what people's early reactions have been to the title, Life is Messy.
Yeah, so I mean, they've been reacting to that for many, many months as I've been writing. People are always asking me, what are you working on? What are you writing? What's your next book? And I would say, I'm writing a book called Life is Messy. And just this universal agreement, ain't that the truth? Tell me about it. So I think that probably more than any book I've ever written, it just seems to be resonating with people at this time. They hear the title and they're like, yep. And that has been, I think, a great affirmation, because writing a book is incredibly difficult, and I don't care how many you've written. In fact, I think it gets more difficult the more you write, because, if people have a good experience with one of your books, they have expectations. The expectations get ratcheted up every time they read a book. And so I think to have some affirmation through the process, because it is also a very solitary process. It is it's a lonely pastime. There are things that we get to do with teams, and it's incredible, right? To work with a team and to accomplish something together is a fantastic feeling throughout the process. Writing a book is not like that. It is a solitary activity, and it is, I think, psychologically draining, because, I don't know, I don't know a good writer who doesn't think that what they're writing is ordinary, mediocre, inadequate when they're writing it, and even once they're finished writing it. But then we pass it over to the reader, and the reader gets to decide. And even a lot of that has to do with where the reader is at in their life, and will it resonate? Some books will resonate enormously with a person, and their best friend might think, not so much. Is it the book, or is it where people are in their life, how open they are to a message?
You read a little bit from the book, and you mentioned that it gets harder and harder to write books the more and more you write them. And I think one of the most interesting things about reading this book, Life is Messy, is that it's very different from anything that I've read from you in the past. Its format is different. The way that you write is a little bit different. And even just the content itself. I've known you for about 6 years. And one of the surprising things when you first meet you is that you are very introverted and you're very private. And yet I open up this book and I think it's page 10. These pages were born out of 3 years of excruciating suffering. And you write it from a very personal angle. How did this book come about?
I mean, this is a book I never thought I'd write. It is based on, an astoundingly difficult time in my life. And the source material for it was the journals from that 3 years of my life. So I didn't start with a blank page. As events were unfolding over the past couple of years in the world, I kept feeling this sort of challenge, call, sort of demand. This is the book you need to write now. And initially I'm like, no, I'm not going to write that. I'm not ever going to write that. And then I'm like, okay, well, how do I write that without writing about that time in my life? And I realized, well, you can't write that book without, sharing that with the reader. And so there is that wrestle, there is that tug of war about what to share about yourself, what not to share about yourself. And this is definitely a book where I share more about myself than any other book. I think that when people read Resisting Happiness, the main feedback from Resisting Happiness was, I loved how you shared your own struggles, with many of the things I've talked about over the past 30 years. I mean, this is on an epic level compared to that. I mean, this is sort of really bearing my soul in ways that, I probably never thought I would in writing. So it is a very different book, I think, on a number of levels. One, it's very personal to me. I think provides the reader with unique insights into my life and my struggles. It came from journals, and I wanted to have sort of a less finished feel. I wanted the book to be a little bit messy, So I think you go from one section to the next, and they aren't necessarily connected. I think it is a book you can read one section and really go away and think about that. I could have smoothed it out and made it all pretty and sit together and that sort of thing. And I really resisted that. I really didn't want to do that. So I think it has sort of a raw, natural sort of experience. As if someone had let you, given you their personal journal and said, have a read.
Yeah. This
is what I struggle with. These are the questions I have about life. These are the questions I have about myself. These are the things I hope for. This is the way the world has surprised me. And this is the way, the world and people have disappointed me. This is the way I've exceeded my expectations of myself. And these are the ways that I feel like I've let myself down, I've let other people down. And that, like anybody, I struggle with the ideas of not feeling like I'm enough, or feeling like my contributions are inadequate. It's all of that. And that is messy stuff. And I'm okay with it being messy.
Yeah. So in reading it for me, so its rawness was surprising, but I think what was more surprising is I've never read a book of yours that was sort of disorienting as I read it in a positive way. I'd be reading about one thing about your life, and then it would shift to something totally different. And it was sort of that process of disorienting, and how good that was for me as the reader. That was most surprising for me. What do you think most people will be surprised about when they get this book, which is a different Matthew Kelly book?
So interestingly, I think many of my books are different. I'm always trying to reach people where they're at. I'm always trying to reach new audiences. I'm always trying to have something to say that will help people, that will be hopeful to people. And a lot of that is driven by, I had this idea in my writing process. Like, when I first started speaking and writing, I was traveling, 250, 300 days a year. And you get on a plane, inevitably you sit next to someone, and inevitably they ask, what do you do? And I wanted to write books that I could give to anybody. And this is what I do. Now, some of them are for very specific audiences, and that is not true of those books. But there are others, like The Rhythm of Life, like Resisting Happiness, and like this book, that I feel like I could sit down next to anybody on a plane, and that, they could enjoy it, benefit it. But I think it is a surprising book. I think it is disorienting. I think good books should be disorienting, because we get comfortable in our lives, we get comfortable in our relationships, and when we do, we stop growing. We can get soft. We've seen this all the time, like with people who are the best in the world at whatever they do. And when they start out, they're very hungry and they're driven and they're all of these things. Then they become very successful and they become soft, and they lose their genius. And I think that's true for all of us. And I think it's something all of us need to be jolted out of from time to time. I think good friends, good relationships jolt us out of that. I think good books jolt us out of that. And, I think one of the most powerful points in the book is the idea that even great experiences can be tremendously disorienting. If we have a car accident, we sort of expect that to be disorienting. If someone tells you have cancer, we expect that to be disorienting. But you work really hard, and then you go on a vacation and you're laying on the beach doing nothing, just relaxing. And that can be astoundingly disorienting, because all of a sudden, laying there on the beach, you realize, my life doesn't make sense anymore. What am I doing? And so this, beach vacation that should be, blissful and all the things we imagine it to be, ends up becoming disorienting. And disorienting in a really good way. And I hope the book is that for people. It has been that for me.
When you write something that's very personal, you obviously don't share everything. So when you are writing a book that's very personal, it's natural for people to want to know, every little detail. So how did you decide what to be in the book and what not to be in the book?
Yeah. I love music and I love lyrics. And I think great lyrics allow the listener to decide what the song is about. And sometimes you love a song. It's like it's part of the soundtrack of your life. okay? And then you see the musician interviewed, and they tell you what the song is about, and it ruins the song for you. Because you can never forget what they said the song is actually about. But in your own heart, in your own mind, in your own soul, you have made that song about something else. And so I think great lyrics are specific enough to put us in the ballpark, but vague enough to allow us to personalize it. And this is a question I wrestled with this book more than any. And that's what I was trying to accomplish. I wanted to share my story, or part of my story, the messiest parts. But I wanted to share it in a way that the reader didn't get to the end of the book and say, this book is about Matthew Kelly. I want the reader to get to the end of the book and say, wow, this book is about me, And I think that's an incredibly difficult thing to accomplish. And I think each reader gets to decide how I did.
So I want to dive into the book now. There are a couple of just fantastic questions. Some of them, and some of the sections, I think we could spend the entire time talking about just that one sentence or that one idea. And probably the one that will get the most attention is this line here. And you call it a more beautiful question. And you actually call it as one of the most beautiful questions I have ever stumbled upon. Can something that has been broken be put back together in a way that makes it more beautiful than ever before? Where did that question come from?
So this is really the central question of the book. We live in a disposable culture. When something breaks, we throw it away and buy a new one. The dilemma or the predicament that creates is, what do we do with our own broken selves? What do we do with broken relationships? What do we do with broken institutions, broken dreams? You can't throw these things away and buy a new one. And so I think this is one of the central questions of our age. And it is something we all struggle with, but I think something that we struggle to articulate. The Japanese have an art form called kintsugi. When we break a vase or a bowl or something, we throw it away, buy a new one. The Japanese artists gather up these ceramic pieces and they put it back together. Only when they put it back together, they don't try to hide the cracks. They mix gold dust with the glue. And so when the piece is put back together, it has these lines of gold that show exactly where the cracks are, but they're beautiful. I mean, these ceramics are astoundingly beautiful. And so the idea is, the question is, can something that has been devastatingly broken be put together and become more beautiful than ever before? And in these ceramics, I believe we discovered that the answer is yes. The extension of the question and where the book really goes is, can someone who has been devastatingly broken be healed and become more beautiful and more lovable than ever before? I believe our default answer to that question is no. And I believe that is creating, massive sadness, anxiety in us all. Because it's sort of a hopeless proposition, right? And it simply is not true, and that is the conclusion I come to throughout the book for myself, and it is the conclusion that I hope the reader will come to is yes, you have been broken in your life. Yes, you have made choices, bad choices. Yes, you have been hurt. You've had your heart broken. And as a result of that, you are broken and wounded, but you can be healed and you can become more beautiful and more lovable than ever before. Is my dream for the reader, is my hope for the reader, is that they can come to that conclusion, because I think it is an astoundingly liberating conclusion, and changes the way we look at ourselves forever, and changes the way we look at other people in their brokenness, in their woundedness, as they deal with their mess.